We say fight back!
Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out on the polls, at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well. Only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig national convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. It's Wednesday. Let's get right into it. We've got a lot coming up on the show today, and we will get to that as we continue through. But for our first hour, it's Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan. Our old friend, he is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
So all kinds of craziness now on Capitol Hill. We've got this new Kushner book coming out. In fact, Vicki Ward is going to be with us in the 3rd hour of our program today, laying out the whole Kushner Inc. thing, which is totally weird. The Kushner Inc. thing is, not the book. We've got the Mueller report about to come out, and Trump looks like he's having a Twitter meltdown, and some people are wondering if that's connected to the imminence or the possible imminence of the Mueller report. I'm wondering if, what you think of all that stuff and if there's anything else on your radar today.
Sure, Tom. Well, first of all, the Senate and the House aren't in this week, so there is a little less activity in that sense happening, but plenty of other activity. And clearly in the last few days watching the Republicans really get ready for what they think is the Mueller report coming out. I'm not exactly in that camp. I think, we've been saying this for a few weeks. It's imminent, and I'm not really sure if it is, just based on some other previous reports, how long it's taken to put them together. But Republicans certainly are getting ready for what could be a report, and you're watching all kinds of rhetoric out there. And you're watching the president this weekend. He averaged a tweet an hour this weekend. Even for him, that is excessive, and over all sorts of subjects, except, of course, the subjects he probably should have talked about, like the terror and hatred that occurred in New Zealand. But I do think you're seeing a ramping up of people getting ready in case it comes out. But Donald Trump clearly is reacting to something, whether it's the timing or it's information that he's found out that they have now. It's been a rough couple days for the president.
Just a broadly political question, if I may. If this report comes out, doesn't specifically indict the president, but already, for example, we know from the indictment of Michael Cohen that according to the prosecutors, according to Cohen's testimony, and according to the court ruling, Cohen was directed to commit the crimes for which he's going to prison by Donald Trump himself, and that Trump, directed this illegal payoff to these two women. If the report comes out with that kind of thing, where, that hasn't been enough to get him impeached. Of course, it would have easily been enough to get Obama impeached. But, how do you think your colleagues in Congress are going to handle this? Or even if it calls for an indictment when he leaves office, or even an indictment within office, how do you think that?
Yeah, well, I think the things to watch for is Donald Trump and the Republicans will try to point to collusion, even though collusion itself, in and of itself, may not be what comes out of the report. In fact, likely not. In the definition, Donald Trump has set it up to be, and Republicans will jump on that. But I think there will be plenty of other things that come out that show Trump and Trump associates clearly violated the law and did things that would be impeachable, or that would be, law enforcement worthy regardless. And I think between what the Democrats are doing right now by getting lots and lots of information on things that go beyond what the Mueller investigation is looking at, and the Mueller report itself, we have to be very careful. They're going to try to get us lost on one single word, collusion, and we need to know that there's going to be, I think, quite a few interesting things in there that we would never accept from any president, much less this president, and the amount of information I think that's going to come out. So I think we're going to have to be very careful on it'll be a semantical fight the minute it gets released. Yeah, amen.
And apparently, the news I'm seeing this morning is that they've literally had conversations in the White House about how whatever the report says, and if it doesn't contain an indictment, they're all going to claim great victory.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
There we go. It is Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Our number 202-808-9925. And Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Pocan, and Tom, for taking my call. Yeah, I hear now that the president's hitting and he needs about a big tax cut, because this one, like Tom predicted, is starting to wear off and the economy's going in the toilet. Where's it going to go? To the 1% middle class? Have you guys been told where this next big tax cut's coming and going to? Because the economy's starting to really tank.
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, it'll be a completely fake one, right? Because last time, that's the only thing the Republicans did for 2 years was provide a tax cut where, over 80% of the money is going to the top 1% in 10 years. And, they know now they're in trouble because people started to not get the refunds they were supposed to. People started realizing it with their tax return. They've been lied to. And then we've got all kinds of other groups showing us problems that occurred by that tax bill because it didn't have the proper review necessary. If he puts anything out, it's going to be for show, for election. And he knows that there's a Democratic majority in the House and a Republican majority in the Senate. So it is unlikely any tax proposal that Donald Trump puts out would be accepted, because we still have to clean up the last mess that they did, where they lowered the corporate rate as much as they did and lowered the rate for the richest in this country. So I think he may try some rhetoric on this, but this isn't very real if Donald Trump puts something forward.
Mary in Las Vegas, Nevada, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call. I hope I'm posing my question concisely. If Trump wins another term and he gets indicted by the Southern District in New York, or even if before we indict him now, will that stay the tolling of the statute of limitations? Because I feel like that's what's happening here. Like he's going to try to stretch things out and win so that he's not held accountable after he gets out of office.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much the statute of limitations or just him. You know, there's a lot of rumor that people are saying he just wants to get reelected so that they can't arrest him, because there is a question, and this is right out of what could happen in the Mueller report. Even if they show things that are indictable, because he's sitting as a president, the Attorney General's office has said that they consider it, you can't indict the president. So in that sense, that alone may be a reason why we have to react to the report in a way that is different than a direct indictment, because there may be that direction from the Attorney General's office saying you can't indict a sitting president. So I think there's a lot of hypothesis that he is running just to continue to stay out of getting arrested. I think the New York case, as you mentioned, is far more relevant for him. They can go after him at any time. And I don't think he'll just get away with anything if he gets reelected. I do think, though, that it could potentially, as long as he keeps appointing the Attorney General, give him some avoidance of any time that they would look at anything.
Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hi, Mark. This is Brad, and my question is, I understand you're part of the Progressive Caucus, and part of my question involves the political calculus between, if the Mueller report really is bad for the president, letting him sit in office versus impeaching him and trying to get Republicans over in the Senate over to your side. And because the idea is Pence maybe, and I'm not sure how much Pence is going to be caught up in what Mueller is doing, but the idea that Pence might be more effective as a legislator, whereas Trump is on Twitter and feeding his ego, Pence is more of a political technician, if you want to call it that, and I'll take my answer off air.
Sure. I guess, Brad, the way I look at it is this is an issue, a constitutional issue. And if someone's done something wrong and we need to have to go after that person, we need to do that regardless of even if the next person in line is worse. But we have to adhere to the Constitution. If someone's violated the law, we have to go after that, and then we'll still politically go after the next in line. So I think that's the best response I would give you on that.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls for the hour. 202-808-9925. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. He represents Wisconsin. And welcome back. Victoria, listening on KPFK in Upland, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, this is Victoria, and I just had a quick question. If we think the game plan for the president is to be reelected to avoid being indicted or arrested after his first term, is there anything we can do at the state level to introduce bills or pass laws where we can't have anybody with an indictment against them to be on the ballot for president?
Victoria, I don't know. I don't know if that would pass also constitutional muster, whether or not you could do that. But, again, I don't think he's running for re-election just to avoid. I mean, some people have put that hypothesis out there. I think this guy is such a narcissist. He is running because he's going to continue to try to figure out how to enrich himself and his family by being president, and that's why his ego wants to be reelected, and this is also something that would come along with it. But I don't think this is the sole reason. So I think focusing on that may be a little bit off the main focus. What we should be looking at is don't get lost on the word collusion, because he clearly keeps using that for a reason, and realizing that they may not indict a president even though there's indictable offenses because of how the Attorney General's office has decided to operate, which is going to put more pressure on members of Congress to act and more, quite honestly, focus on what's happening in New York State.
Paul in Lucerne, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman, I'd like to thank you for doing a great job. You're awesome.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
A suggestion. All these Republicans are talking about Medicare for all is going to cost us a lot of money. They're talking about how Green New Deal is going to cost a lot of money. Well, why don't we start throwing that back at their face? And then what I mean by that is, if the Republicans care so much about jobs, how come they left in the provision in the tax code that the American taxpayers pay to offshore jobs?
Right.
How much is that costing the American taxpayer? How much is the American taxpayer paying to take our jobs overseas? That's a good question. I'd like an answer to it. And I think every time a pundit or anybody asks you that, you say, well, it costs that, but you know how much we pay to get rid of our jobs? And you throw that back at them.
So, Paul, let's hear what Congressman Pocan has to say.
Yeah, Paul. So, I mean, I also think, what people forget is when you provide a tax break, especially for only a small number of people in the country, that's a tax expenditure. That money is happening in lieu of spending it on something else that might benefit a much greater number of people. So that alone you could focus on, right? Just that tax cut bill they had. I would argue, though, that when you get to Medicare for All, I think we really need to look at the costs, and we need to do a much better job, because I think the numbers they're putting out there are completely outrageous. You're going to have so many other savings when you take out the administrative costs, the marketing costs, some of the other costs that are out there in healthcare that are wasted. You're really going to have other savings. And when employers can reinvest that money that currently is going towards healthcare to their business and hiring more employees, that's going to spur the economy. So there's a lot of things we have to look at and be able to describe. But just to the very point you had, I think it's fair to especially point out tax expenditures are an expenditure, and that is a decision the Republicans made. Instead of putting money towards health care or investing in our infrastructure, they put it to the top 1% through tax breaks.
Yeah, and would love to do it again if they had the chance.
They sure would.
We are talking with Congressman Mark Pocan. He's taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. His website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. We'll be back in about 15, 20 seconds with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan. Welcome back to Middays with Mark. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Richard in Smithton, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm pretty disturbed with this guy in the White House, a draft dodger. I'm a Vietnam vet. And I really hate the way he's cutting down John McCain and his family. I wonder if you can bring up something on the floor of the U.S. House. I know Johnny Isaac is supposed to be doing that in the Senate. Can you do something like that on the floor?
Yeah, Richard, I think there's going to be a lot when we get back next week on this. I mean, it was truly disgusting to watch this president attack someone who, regardless if I agree with his politics or not, he was someone who is an American hero, who went through incredible sacrifice when he was in the military, who served the country for a long time in the U.S. Senate, and for the president to be so petty and pathetic as he has been, is going to absolutely have outrage. I saw Chuck Schumer is actually going to talk about introducing a bill to rename the Russell Senate office building after John McCain. That certainly will be interesting as well. But it is just one more sign of this president and the arrogance and everything that we have to deal with this president when he attacks someone like John McCain, who, again, I may not agree with ideologically, but I know on many fronts he's been a hero, and the last thing you do is do that, especially after someone's passed away. That's just tacky in only the way someone whose last name is Trump can be tacky.
Stuart in Southern California listening on KPFK. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, is that me?
That's you.
Okay, I didn't hear my name. I hear a lot of people complaining about Trump and talking about getting out the vote. What I don't understand is I don't see him as being the problem, because he lost the vote by 3.9 million, yet he's in the White House. To me, that is the problem. But I don't hear anyone talking about that. If you could please enlighten me as to what I'm missing here.
Sure, Stuart. I think actually, it's being talked about incredibly in the sense that the very first bill we passed in Congress, H.R. 1, was a bill that had election reform, campaign finance reform, and ethics reform. So we're recognizing that there are many things when it comes to voting that made it more difficult for people in some areas to be able to vote, that clearly electoral college is an issue, and I know Elizabeth Warren raised that this week. But that's kind of exactly what we are talking about. But I do disagree. This also is Donald Trump is the problem. If we had elected someone else who wasn't reacting like a buffoon so often, we wouldn't have to have these really hard debates about how sad it is that the President of the United States won't stand up to neo-Nazis and racists, and that he really appeals to the worst in everyone as his political base. That deserves a lot of discussion because that's not what this country is about, and we need to make sure the world understands that's not what this country is about.
Do you see a move to do away with the Electoral College in the House?
I don't see it widespread enough where you'd have to, to actually get it done. It would take
constitutional
a lot of Republican, constitutional amendment and a lot of Republican support. But I do think it's definitely worthy of debate. I mean, the fact that 2 recent elections, the person who won the most votes didn't get elected, that's a clear problem. And I absolutely think we should be addressing this.
Yeah. Carl in McChesney Park, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Mr. Pocan. I got some good news for you. I finally got cost of living adjustment on my Social Security this year. First time in 4 years.
I'm glad you did, Carl. It was long overdue.
Yeah, Paul Ryan must not be Speaker of the House anymore, I take it.
Well, I think a lot of things came to play, but it's we really should have a different index period, in my opinion, for Social Security. What most seniors are spending their money on is not what the normal CPI is attached to, especially things like gasoline. Many seniors don't drive, but about 25% of what seniors spend their money on is around health care and medications, and that's not represented at that level in the CPI. So we should have a different index called the CPI-E that takes into consideration what seniors actually spend their money on, and that should be what gets attached to your increase, and then you would have gotten an increase every one of those last 4 years.
And we actually already have that index. We just haven't applied it to Social Security, right?
Exactly. And it would just make so much sense. I mean, my mom just turned 90 in the last month, and, she hasn't been driving for about 5 years. So gasoline, isn't going to affect anything. It affects her cost of living. But, she just got a new medication for a new arthritis problem, and that's where a lot of her money is going, and that's for every senior, and that's what we should be recognizing when we provide any bumps to Social Security.
Congressman, we just have 30 seconds to a hard break here. Do you see any change? Do you see, Donald Trump arguably got elected, to the extent that he did, on a promise that he would, unlike other Republicans, he would not cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. And here his budget has massive, multi-billion-dollar cuts to all 3 programs. Do you see any pushback from the Republicans in Congress against that?
No, in fact, I hope we can find a way to make sure we put that budget on the floor of Congress and get a vote. And let's see where people stand. Are they standing with Donald Trump's cuts to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, or are they going to stand with the American people? We may have some difficulties for other reasons to do that, but this is exactly what Donald Trump represents. Are people with Donald Trump on this or not? They should have to respond.
Yeah. Oh, I missed my time cue. I was off by a minute. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. We have 1 minute. Quick question for Congressman Pocan. Omar? No, Omar. Okay, I'm not going to give somebody else 40 seconds. It's not quite fair. How do Republicans deal with this? How do they go back to their home districts and hold a town hall when everybody, when they're actively, and they have been since the 30s, campaigning against Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? I don't get it.
Well, and my guess is, Tom, a lot of them aren't doing town halls right now, and that's something that people should be pressuring their elected officials. I don't care what level of government, what political party, you have to have town halls. Next week we do a Facebook Live one. In April we'll do them across my district. But a lot of Republicans aren't doing them right now.
That's great. When you do your Facebook Live ones, are you inviting people outside your district?
We do, and I think we're doing it either Monday or Tuesday night. I'm sorry, I don't know right now. I'll look it up over the break.
That's great. Well, be sure to tweet it to me, and I'll retweet it, and we'll let people know about it.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Cool. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. Pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Back with more calls for him in just a moment. We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is in Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained, but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. "Did y'all sleep here?" a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump triumphs," and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back to Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. JT in Austin, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. So my question is, why are Democrats spending time debating the term socialism, for which we know in this country we have socialism for the rich, when Democrats' policies, economic policies, tend to be supported by the vast majority of Americans? Why aren't we saying, like, we want a big tent or a strong safety net instead of getting hung up over the term socialism as the Republicans want us to?
Yeah, JT, I guess my attitude is what you said is you're right. The Republicans want us to talk about socialism rather than everything they're doing. And whenever we jump onto whatever they want us to talk to, usually we're losing. And I don't know if that's an especially useful conversation. Unfortunately, a lot of media these days wants to have this conversation. I personally, if someone wants to say they're a socialist, they can say they're a socialist. But for us to jump on that word when no one else is using it, I mean, it's not the mainstream word by House Democrats as they're introducing bills. It does a disservice to the very things we're introducing, because what we're not talking about then is the most sweeping bill to address corruption in Washington being H.R. 1. We're not talking about the gun violence prevention measures that we passed out of the House of Representatives in, I think, the first month that we were in office, or month and a half. We're not talking about the bills that we're going to do for pay equity or for raising minimum wage, and we're not going to talk about going after pharmaceutical drug prices. Those are the things that people actually care about. They talk about at their kitchen table, not about isms, whatever label people want to put on. And jumping to the Republicans' talking points, I think, my opinion only, is a disservice to the very things that we are actually doing, which are far more substantive and really show a stark contrast between Democrats and Republicans.
Agreed. And by the way, Congressman, I published a piece this morning in an alternate. It's over at Raw Story. It's on Common Dreams. It's on Truthdig, and it's on nakedcapitalism.com. About that very topic. I just sent a copy of it to you and Congressman Ro Khanna, so
thank you.
I would love to get your feedback on that. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, you are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Yes, Congressman. And Tom, how are y'all today?
Good, Bob.
Good. I wonder if the Democratic Party and yourself would be supportive of Jay Inslee as a candidate for presidency, because he's got a lot together, having worked on the Apollo project all those years and such, and actual governance. What do you think?
Yeah, Bob, I'll tell you, I'm watching with great interest all the candidates, right? I think we're up to maybe 15 now, and there's still more coming in, or maybe we're at 14, and I'm starting to count Biden and Michael Bennett and some of the other folks that we think are going to get in the race as well. I think it's going to be interesting, each one as they carve out their lanes. I mean, Jay Inslee is kind of trying to carve out anyway. Climate change is his major issue, and, as a governor, that always gives a candidate other credentials they can point to. Just in the last week, watching Elizabeth Warren roll out the Electoral College, putting out new ideas. Bernie's done that for years and years, put out a lot of new ideas. Beto O'Rourke kind of running in a very different approach, not so much on individual issues, but as bigger themes and aspirations. I'm enjoying watching all the candidates, and I just, my job, I think, as a progressive, is to make sure they all, when they get to policy issues, they're talking about progressive policy issues that benefit the most amount of people. So any individual candidate at this point, I'm kind of staying out of my conversations about it, other than I'd like to work with each and every one of them to have as progressive a policy platform as possible, and we absolutely have to beat Donald Trump.
Tom in Stanford, Kentucky, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman and Tom, I want to talk about who is the Democratic Party and how do we reach out to the Republicans. And I pose that if we can put in writing, because not all of us Democrats are public speakers like you guys, hard, accurate data, like how many people, what percent of the people earn less than $15 an hour? What percent of the people earn minimum wage? What percent, the demographics of the United States in writing? How much taxes are being paid? Hard numbers. And if that could actually be put like on a website for the Democratic Party, hard, accurate talking points to counteract the Republicans' lies.
Sure, Tom, I hear you. Let me say, first of all, I think you have to combine that with overarching values as well, because where you really appeal to people is not going to necessarily be through a number, but it's got to be on that larger value connection. And I think then those numbers add to the reinforcement. So I think we still need to approach on a bigger, higher level first to really get to people's hearts and minds. But you're right. I mean, I'll give you one good example on minimum wage, because we're going to have that bill coming up very soon. I always ask people, guess what percent of people who make the minimum wage are high school students living at home, right, like under 20 years old. And I've had people guessing 70%, 50% at various schools I talk to. The reality is it's about 9%. They have median ages in the upper 30s, mid to upper 30s. Most people, it's their single wage. That's their biggest wage they're bringing in. So there's a lot of myths on issues like that, and I agree that's a great way to do it. But I think the bigger value is, how could anyone who's working 40 hours a week be living in poverty? In Madison, Wisconsin, you'd have to work 91 hours on minimum wage a week in order to afford a median two-room apartment. So if we go to a higher value, those numbers are strong support, but I think you attach really with people at the value level.
John in Kenosha, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman, rather see National Airport named for John McCain. Much more fitting for his statue and his being a naval aviator and a public servant. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, John, I love that idea. It's a great idea. I don't know if you'll find Republicans yet, although it does seem like Donald Trump seems to throw Ronald Reagan under the bus on a regular basis with his policies, but I don't know if you'll see them willing to change it. I think, the Senate office building is probably a little easier for senators to do, but it's a great suggestion, and John, Kenosha's my hometown, so shout out to you.
Yeah, especially as I recall, Richard Russell was a segregationist, so it might be a little easier to replace him with John McCain. Mary in Louisville, Colorado, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you so much. Hello, Congressman. Nice to talk to you. I wanted to compliment you and thank you. I saw the live stream living room conversation you did at the History Museum in Appleton yesterday with Mike Gallagher. That was wonderful. And my question for you is, I love the cross-partisan civil conversation. And to quote you from yesterday, I know it may not sell detergent on cable news, but how do we get more living room conversations, civil conversations between people like yourself and Congressman Gallagher? How do we make more of those happen so that we can see people can work together rather than just tuning in to see the fight on cable network?
Yeah, I mean, I think people around the country should do things like that, invite people from different political perspectives to come together and to talk and answer questions, because one of the things that does take rhetoric down a drop, but I would argue as a progressive, I know that the people agree with the values more than, on most issues than where the Republicans are at, whether it be on health care, on the climate change, on taxation. And if I have an opportunity, the best way I'm going to change someone's mind is by being able to get out there and have that conversation and show where the people are and where the support is. So I think those are real important conversations to have. We did this, Tom, up in Appleton, Wisconsin, and it's just, you know, you're not going to pass things always just your way. It's rare you have Democrats in charge of all levels of government or Republicans. So we're going to have to appeal to people on why your ideas are best. And
so you sat and had a long when she said Mike Gallagher, I thought of the right-wing talk show host, and I thought, whoa, no way.
No, this member of Congress from northeastern Wisconsin.
And he's a Republican.
Yeah, and he, to his credit, he voted one of the 13 in the House of Representatives against the president's national emergency declaration because he said, you know, it was an abuse of we've given too much power to the White House already, and so I mean, but it takes having individual conversations if you're going to ever bring Republicans over, and if you're ever going to get to a point that we need to impeach this president, you're only going to do it with some Republican support. All the more you're going to have to develop those kind of conversations.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it's also, you know, to that, it's one of the reasons why I often invite conservatives on this program to either try to talk with me or to pay me.
Yeah.
Sometimes it turns into a little more of a brawl than you would expect. Congressman Mark Pocan is taking your calls for the hour on Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Every Wednesday, Congressman Pocan drops by. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You can check out his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. And we'll be right back. And welcome back. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania, watching us on Free Speech TV via Roku. Hey, Paul, what's up? You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. I'd like to address the potential for impeachment of President Trump. And just to preface it, I'd like to say that there has to be an absolute legal basis. I don't want to say that it should be based on speculation or we're pretty sure he did something wrong. But, you know, once reports are prepared from the Judiciary Committee, from Congress, from the Department of Justice, where there's evidence gathered, laws are broken, at that point, what I would like to advocate for is the absolute need to prosecute the president for crimes, even if they aren't the highest crimes of treason, because everyone in this country for the past 10, 15 years has watched the extremely powerful and wealthy get away with murder, from the financial collapse of Wall Street, along with many other things that we see happening in this country as our infrastructure falls apart, bridges collapsing, lead poisoning in water, and so on and so forth. People are not being prosecuted for criminal acts. And what's happening is people are abandoning the entire concept that anything good can come out of not just Washington, but even in state capitals. If you and people like you that are getting elected to Congress in the wave of progressive candidates don't go after the president, once there's clearly established evidence and clearly established laws broken, a lot more is going to be going on.
Paul, let's let Congressman Pocan respond to your question, or if there was a question in there.
Yeah, sure. I think, Paul, I do agree that what you said when you said clearly established evidence and information. And that's part of what we're doing right now by doing the proper oversight that Paul Ryan completely gave up the last 2 years that he should have done as a political branch of government. We're finally doing that. So between the Mueller report and what we're doing, if we collect information that shows the president did something wrong, absolutely we need to go after him. But we first have to collect the information, and that's what we're doing right now. So I think it's important to really emphasize that because some people want us to get a few steps ahead from where we're able to pass anything right now. And we need to make sure we're gathering the information, asking the right questions, and letting the American people know what the situation is. And then if something is done wrong, we absolutely should follow up.
Barbara in Fairfax, California. 1 minute to the break, Barbara. A quick question for Congressman Pocan. Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live.
Thank you. As a daughter of a federal criminal under Ronald Reagan, my father took a stand in the 1981 union strike, taking a stand for political honesty. I do think it's time for Democrats to come more clean with their past history in order to see who and what we've been for the last 40 years. As a substitute teacher here in Fairfax, I don't even make enough money to pay rent. I've had to rent out my own room to a single mother and her 2 kids. I sleep on a sofa. I go to a food bank. Roaring County, which is one of, they say, progressive communities, high-level standard of living. And I can barely even make a living, yet I'm trying to do what's right, and that's by getting involved in our educational system, which is a disaster. What are the Democrats doing and others doing about this? Because this is an economic issue that my father and his union members stood up for and lost everything and went for broke to do in 1981.
Oh, my goodness. Barbara, Congressman, if we could answer this on the other side of the break, sure. And I'll just essentially restate Barbara's question because it's a good one, and I know you don't want to answer it in 5 seconds. Barbara, thank you for that call. We'll be back. It's 48 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour on Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Middays with Mark here with Congressman Mark Pocan. Congressman, Barbara just was asking the question. She's a teacher in Marin County and yet is making so little that she has to rent out her own bedroom to somebody else and she sleeps on the couch. What is Congress, what are Democrats in Congress doing to address this crisis of basically, fully employed, what used to be middle-class people who are now basically at the very, very bottom of the middle class or the very top of the working poor, reestablishing our middle class for at least professional workers.
Well, and I think a big part of what the Democrats ran on had a lens on income inequality, and it covers a lot of different things. One of the things we're going to take up in the next couple months, or 2 things, I should say, paycheck equity. Right now, women are still making 80 cents on the dollar to a man, and if you're a Latina woman, it's probably 55 cents on the dollar to a man. We're also going to be raising the minimum wage to $15 by 2024. That'll lift the floor for wages, which should help everyone's wages go up. But we also need to do more that's going to be, maybe difficult with the Republican Senate and President around collective bargaining rights and allowing people to have a voice in their workplace so they can negotiate better. A lot of the provisions that President Obama did at the end of his administration to fix labor law that President Trump overturned the executive orders, we need to put back in place to protect workers. Too many workers. Tom, it's estimated 70 million people are categorized as independent contractors, largely miscategorized, and that often means you don't have any benefits, retirement, et cetera. So there's a whole lot that we are trying to work on. Some we're going to be able to do the next few weeks, some that we're going to need a few more changes, like maybe a change in the White House and the Senate. But everything we do has that lens as we're moving forward.
Greg in Schaumburg, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good day, gentlemen. Thank you both for your public service.
Thank you, Greg.
My question for the congressman is regarding immigration, and I know it's a heated topic. I think the wall is foolish, but why not consider an incentive for those coming into this country from the southern border to come in through ports of entry, and then after a brief check, give them a Social Security number. That, in my mind, works for two things. A, they are starting to pay taxes. B, you could actually track where they are. So if you find out that they are criminals or misrepresented their application when they first came in, you know where they're at.
Yeah, Greg, I think I'd even take it, if I could, a step farther to 30,000-foot level, which is we just need to go back to when my first session 4 sessions ago, where we passed a bipartisan bill with almost 70 votes out of the Senate that was comprehensive immigration reform, period. We have, depending on the count, 11 to 13 million people who right now who are undocumented who are here. We don't necessarily have a problem at the border with people coming in right now. In fact, we have a net migration still. But we do have to address the real situation for so many people who are already here, as well as make sure we have the proper standards set up for people coming into the country. Right now, the whole system is not working the way it's supposed to, and the answer is not simply a wall. The answer is how do you deal with it comprehensively, and I think that's what's the long overdue conversation for Congress.
Jay in Salida, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hi there, guys. I was curious as to whether Congress was investigating whether or not Justice Kennedy may have sold his seat on the Supreme Court.
And whether it might have involved his son working at Deutsche Bank on the Donald Trump contracts, Congressman?
Yeah, Jay, I don't know offhand. To tell you the truth, I serve on the Appropriations Committee, so more of our investigative work has been over some of the policy issues, like the separating children at the border and the conditions they're being held in, et cetera. That might be something Judiciary Oversight and Government Reform is doing. I just don't know that answer offhand. I know they're doing an awful lot right now. They're collecting documents so they know what to really start some of the work on. It may be happening, but I don't have the answer to that.
Marta in Big Bear Lake, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, hi. A recent Gallup poll showed that health care and the economy were the top 2 issues. Russia and climate change were at the bottom. So my question is, can we reframe, instead of talking about climate change as just, a problem, can we reframe that as health care, Medicare for all, and a Green New Deal with millions and millions of high-paying jobs, 21st century economic opportunities. So that shows healthcare and the economy, which are the 2 main issues, as opportunities, creating opportunities.
Yeah, I think, Marta, that is happening, especially on the new Green Deal. The new Green Deal is a resolution, right? And it's still an evolving document. What it's really saying is we need to have a serious way to address climate change. And if you do that, you're going to create all sorts of new jobs right here in the United States. I mean, so much of our money and energy leaves the country or goes to only certain parts of the country, where in reality, if you have wind and solar and biomass and other renewables, you're not going to be involved in wars in other countries, and that's going to help our bottom line. But also, creating windmill blades or solar cells are jobs right here. Someone has to do the installation. Someone has to make them. And that is a major component of what we talk about when we talk about the new Green Deal. It's about the jobs attached to climate change. I think the real challenge has just been a lot of people describe their own version of what the new Green Deal is. And to be fair, it really is just saying we need to really have a real call to arms to address climate change. But it does include those very economic aspects you're talking about.
Michael in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We just have a minute to the end of the hour, Michael. A real quick question for Congressman Pocan, please.
Okay, quickly. Each time I hear you and even Bernie talk about raising the cap on Social Security, you leave a gap between 125,000 and 250. Is that so Congress doesn't raise their own taxes? They won't be subject to it. And if you require a gap, how about between, say, 50 and 100, so that working stiffs like myself don't have to pay?
Yeah, you'd never lower it. You wouldn't have any money for Social Security. That doesn't make any sense. I think the actual number people are talking is more like 400-something thousand. But I honestly have always said lift the gap completely. I don't think you need to have a cap at 400,000. I would say lift it completely, and you add 75 years to Social Security. But for those people who do talk about it, I think it's around 400,000. I think that's an old conversation from a couple of years ago where people had a couple 100,000, but it hasn't kept up with inflation.
Yeah, I think that came out of the New Dem caucus or something like that.
Yeah.
So, Congressman, in the last 15 seconds, what do you expect to see in the next week?
Well, we'll be back in session next week, and I think we're taking up paycheck fairness, I believe, next week. But we're back to those economic core issues that people talk about at the kitchen table. Just help us get those messages out rather than getting lost on whatever Donald Trump wants us to get lost on.
Amen. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
Of course. Thank you, Tom.
Congressman Mark Pocan, his website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. And just a heads up, the third hour of the program, we're going to be talking to the author of Kushner, Inc. about the true story of Javanka. It's going to get interesting. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglas was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglas was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you, and it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff, and you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
American City.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, that was a remarkable hour with Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Happens pretty much every Wednesday at noon Eastern time. And tip of the hat to Congressman Pocan. Thank you for that. For this hour, I would like to kind of ask the question: is Trump encouraging violence? I mean, we all get it that he's encouraging violence. He's refusing to condemn basically the, this shooter in New Zealand, refusing to reach out to the Muslims, as the Prime Minister of New Zealand specifically asked him to do in their telephone conversation. He continues to, shout out to his white racist base. But how much of this is tied to the Mueller report? I'm beginning to think that a lot of it is, frankly. That we may be on the verge of seeing the Mueller report at the same time that Steve King is encouraging Trump followers to prepare for a civil war, saying that Steve King and Trump's side have 8 trillion bullets. I mean, think about that. A civil war is the only kind of war where literally neighbors kill their neighbors, family members murder family members, all in the name of politics. We refer to the Rwandan genocide as a genocide. Well, it was, but it was also a civil war. And this is what Steve King seems to be calling for. And not even subtly. And even Trump is talking about how he's got the cops and the bikers. And frankly, if Oregon's experience is any indication, where the local police here in Portland were actually conspiring with the Proud Boys, this right-wing group here, in some of the street protests, Trump is right. He does have the cops. So how do we respond? I mean, do we prepare for war and get ready to kill our neighbors when they show up at our house with an AR-15? That seems insane to me. In any other time in our lifetimes, even suggesting such a thing would have been considered insane. But the biggest backers of Trump and Pence right now, and this is perhaps the scariest part of this whole thing, the largest group supporting these guys, arguably out of the, setting aside the disorganized racist right, the biggest organized group supporting Trump are end-time apocalyptic evangelical white Christians who believe that we are on the verge of the last days, that when the capital of Israel is moved to Jerusalem and the Second Temple is rebuilt. This is what Alan Goodman tried to do back in the 1980s when he put a tent up on the Temple Mound, which is right above where the Second Temple was. He thought he was bringing back the Messiah, right? And these people really believe that these are the end times, and the end times are supposed to be, frankly, a bloodbath. And this is the largest group of organized people supporting Trump. So how do we stop this rhetoric from the religious apocalyptic right about how death and destruction is exactly what God wants, and Donald Trump is their Cyrus, their man? How do we stop the rhetoric from that would be the Mike Pence apocalyptic right? How do we stop the rhetoric or respond to the rhetoric? I don't know that we can stop it. Respond to the rhetoric from the Steve Bannon right that as America is becoming more diverse and as we become more accepting of people who are not straight white men, that we are somehow hurting all these straight white men in a way that is causing them to buy guns and get ready for the end. I mean, this is what Steve Bannon is whipping up, not just here in the United States, but across Europe. And not just him. I mean, this whole group. How do we marginalize that kind of rhetoric when the guy in the White House keeps whipping it up? And when the Mueller report comes out, is it possible that if Donald Trump puts civil war, without necessarily using those words, but basically, I mean, he just said it, right? I've got the army, the police, and the bikers. And then Steve King comes out and, yeah, we've got 8 trillion more bullets. If this is Trump's re-election campaign to have a civil war, or if this is his get-out-of-jail campaign, or if this is actually representing a large portion of the American electorate. And it appears to be. I mean, CNN just had a chyron a little bit ago that said that more and more Republicans say that they are proud of Donald Trump as their president. How do we cut through this? Or is this the new normal? I mean, can we expect more and more Donald Trump kind of presidents? Do you think that we're actually at a risk for civil war? I'm frankly rather skeptical about that. Louise and I went to a homeowners association meeting last night. And, you know, some of our neighbors, I'm sure, I mean, in fact, I'd be willing to bet, knowing who they are, that they're Trump supporters. I'm not. But we can get together and talk about, you know, are we going to paint our houses? I mean, you know, it's like, this is like, we can be human beings to each other. On the other hand, you look at countries like Germany or Rwanda or the former Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, where once some critical support systems for a democratic society, in the case of Yugoslavia, even a repressive society, but at least the critical support mechanisms of society as a whole were taken out, then people fell on each other. I mean, and I don't mean fell, I mean, you know, attacked each other, leading to civil wars. I mean, we've had one major civil war in this country, the one in the 1860s. And we had sort of a minor civil war in this country. Jimmy Carter writes about this, you know, brilliantly in the novel that he wrote about, you know, the Civil War, or excuse me, the Revolutionary War, where during the American Revolution, or at least in the first year of the American Revolution, about two-thirds to three-quarters of Americans did not want to have a fight with England. And you had literally some families where one brother would join the Brits, and thinking that they were loyal Brits. The British extensively employed people throughout the colonies, and so they were like, yes, I'm loyal to Great Britain. And then another brother is joining George Washington, and they're shooting at each other. So we had a minor civil war from 1773 to 1780, roughly 81, I believe it was. And then we had a major civil war in the 1860s. So it is not inconceivable, but it should be. I mean, as Donald Trump and Steve King and these other guys on the hard right, the Steve Bannons of the world and the Mike Pence and his apocalyptic buddies, as they continue this talk, this rhetoric that, if followed to its logical extreme, leads us to a civil war. It seems to me that the media, elected Democrats, and all of us as citizens of the United States of America, people who love this democratic republic, have an obligation to speak out against it, to speak out against the white racists who are flashing the OK sign and hoping for the Turner Diaries kind of end of times scenario. To point out exactly what it is. These people are calling for violence. They're calling for civil war. They're calling ultimately for the death of their neighbors, their friends, their co-workers, their family members. And I think we're doing this country a disservice by dancing around this and just, I mean, Wikipedia, there was a guy who put on Wikipedia, he created a new entry for white nationalist terror or terrorism. That category didn't exist before. I talked about that on this program a couple of days ago, and poof, it's disappeared from Wikipedia now. Wikipedia has decided that white nationalist terrorism is something that it's not a thing. Well, there's a bunch of white nationalist terrorists who would beg to differ. And it blows my mind that this happened. That it's like we can't even have this conversation. We've got a serious problem here. So anyhow, we'll pick up your calls on that topic and frankly any of the topics that Congressman Pocan was talking about this morning. Right after this, it's 16 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, defending America from the conservative weapons of mass deception. Stick around, we'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. welcome back. Manuel in Houston, Texas. Hey, Manuel, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? Good to hear you again.
Thank you.
The reason I'm calling, yesterday you had this a little segment, clip where this one lady was saying something about a dictator. She ever thought, that she'd want Trump to be the dictator.
Right.
Well, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm ready for a military to go in there and military coup and take Trump out.
No. You don't want to do that, Manuel.
I know it won't happen, but I'm just counting on her,
Yeah,
because
no, it's
this man
this is the same. What I was just condemning on the right is what you're suggesting on the left, Manuel. We can't. The rule of law. Yes, if Donald Trump has committed crimes and he's already been named without being indicted in the crime of rigging an election, essentially, of illegal campaign contributions to keep Americans from knowing that he had a couple of affairs with a porn star and a Playboy bunny in the year immediately following the birth of his son, his most recent child. That's a clear crime. And frankly, if Barack Obama had done that, I mean, that's way more than Bill Clinton ever did. And, if the shoe were on the other foot, the Republicans would have impeached him a long time ago. And there is a legal process for removing people from office. But talking about, our saying to the military, gee, you need to go in and do this, no, you can't. We can't go there. This is not the topic, no. Jenny in Clio, Michigan. Hey, Jenny, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I had a question about the courts of appeals on the Supreme Court because I was reading there's 1 in 5 that are extreme right now. They just appointed, so the status is about 1 in 5. And then we heard on the Hill that McConnell's trying to push through hundreds of these extremist judges.
Yeah, and by the way, more than half of all the federal judges right now are Republican appointees.
Yeah. And they're not, some are not qualified, some are just extreme rightists in their views.
Right.
So what are they going to do, make the laws and we'll just have to follow them? There doesn't have to be a civil war. Is there a procedure for changing their lifetime appointments or something we can do?
The two things that can be done, number one, and Mitch McConnell, you're right, he's going to blow up he's going to do another nuclear option and right. push through, hundreds of these federal judges, as many as he possibly can, because he blocked them during the last 2 years of the Obama administration. And,
right.
It's such a shame that we didn't take the Senate in the last election. So there's nothing we can do about this. But number one, once normalcy returns, sanity returns to this country, some of these people are so deeply and profoundly unqualified that, frankly, they should be impeached. And perhaps even a group of them should be impeached en masse. That is something that is up to the House of Representatives. They have to, and the threshold for impeachment of a federal judge is the same as it is for President of the United States. You have to have a 2/3 majority in the House and Senate to impeach. And so, that to the best of my knowledge, that and regaining control of the Senate for a long enough period that as more people retire, we can start putting some balance back into our federal court systems. And number 3, expanding the Supreme Court, which is, beyond what you were talking about. Those are the only things that I know of that can be done, Jenny. Jenny, thanks a lot for the call. You have identified what I think is probably the most serious cancer in our American political and judicial system that is being inserted there by Mitch McConnell and on behalf of the right-wing billionaires. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's it's there. It's there for you, and it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out. And sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff, and you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
With you, Christine in Camas, Washington. Hey, Christine, what's up?
Hey, Tom, it's really great to talk to you. I just wanted to say, longtime military family here, and our soldiers take an oath to the Constitution of the United States,
yes,
not to a president. And if Trump tried to use the military in a way that was illegal, like turning, the whole Civil War thing, that's an illegal order. And if you follow that order, you're going to get court-martialed, and you're going to go to a federal prison. More likely what's going to happen is if there's these big groups of, dudes with their AKs, Jim Bob and Bubba are going to have a J-Dam just devour them before they even realize that something's coming.
Have a what devour them?
A J-Dam is a bomb.
Oh, in other words, if you're going to try and take, this is like, these guys who call in and go, yeah, I got, 15 guns in my basement because I'm getting ready for when the government gets corrupt. And I'm like, you really think 15 guns in your basement is going to take on a Black Hawk helicopter?
Well, my husband's a Hornet pilot, for God's sake. He's like, they wouldn't see anything coming.
Yeah.
I mean, drones and all of the other stuff we have, if they start having these like encampments and training centers or things.
Well, they already have those.
War. Right. Well, those, if there is something like a civil war called for, those are going down.
Yeah.
They are going down. That's illegal in every sense of the word in our military code of justice.
Yeah. And so what if, Christine, it turns out that it is, Bubba and his buddies and, a bunch of sheriffs and a few renegade cops? I guess that's, easily taken out by the military, but the military would have to be mobilized by the president, and this president probably wouldn't do it. I mean, what if we devolve into basically low-level conflict?
They would. Well, okay, low-level conflict, definitely. But if, it doesn't matter. They'll go after the president before they're going to let this country go down with illegal orders, is my point.
Yeah, well, we'll see. One would hope that the rule of law and the idea of the Constitution prevails, but as a military, as a person in a military family, I mean, maybe you can address this. Our conversations with Mikey Weinstein, for example, it's been a while since he's been on the program, but he has talked about how this not just evangelical cult has basically infiltrated the Air Force Academy, but an evangelical millennialist cult. In other words, an end-time cult, a group of people who believe these are the end of days and it's their job to help bring it about. And then we learned a couple of days ago that some of these white supremacist groups that have been, this Identity Europa is the big one, and the more kind of, quote, legitimate one, as it were, is this, and it's a white supremacist group, has extensively infiltrated our military.
Yeah.
What do we do?
That is true. That is true. But they also have a chain of command that is pretty darn strict and pretty well established, is what I'm saying. I just don't think.
But Trump keeps shouting out to the troops and trashing the brass. So is he, by doing that, is he setting up a situation where someday there could even be a mutiny?
I just don't think it would go that far.
Yeah.
I really don't.
I sure hope you're right, Christine.
I think it would be just nipped in the bud way earlier.
Yeah.
I really, really do. It's just too...
It is bizarre that we're even having this conversation, I mean, it's just the idea, the fact that, I mean, a conversation that was probably, front and center in 1933 in Germany or 1929 in Italy, but that we're having that conversation in the United States of America right now where the president is sowing seeds of division between the leadership of the military, who would issue those orders to say, don't do what, don't shoot American citizens. And, he's trying to sow seeds of division between the leadership and the average enlisted person.
Right, he is. But I think because of the structure that's in place,
Yeah.
I mean, there really is a very strong structure in place on how things
You're
are
trusting
done.
the UCMJ and military culture, basically.
Yes.
And the structure.
These
But
people care more
the
about
structure is really only as good as the people inside the structure.
True.
Yeah. Okay, Christine, thank you. That's reassuring. And thank you for listening to Sirius XM. That's a great one. Thank you, Christine. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your thoughts. Have these guys gone off the edge? Could Trump actually trigger violence if he's not reelected?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Will Americans go along with this? I mean, already Americans are picking up guns and shooting other Americans, and around the world this is happening. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a single mom, a young single mom in Nevada, worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back to the True People's Media, the Thom Hartmann Program. Jim in Washington, D.C. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind?
Good morning, Tom, or I guess it's afternoon where I am, your old hometown.
Yep.
Listen, I think you're being a little unfair about Wikipedia. And I think
why? Because they won't put up a category of white nationalist terrorism?
Well, actually, there is a category, white nationalist terrorism. I'm looking at it right now. I can link it to you.
Really?
But, yeah.
Well, it wasn't there day before yesterday.
Well, no, but you know what they do have is they do have a very extensive page on white nationalism.
Oh, yeah, but that's a different thing. That's a different thing.
Well, hang on a second. Bear me out for a second here. And it links to the various groups, but it also they also have.
I just searched white nationalist terrorism on Wikipedia, and it's not there. I'm on Wikipedia right now. The page white nationalist terrorism does not exist. You can ask for it to be created.
But Tom, if you stop filibustering for a second, let me explain. It's on there as a category colon white national terrorism. So if you have to go out for the search engine, it has to do with the way Wikipedia is set up. But they do have an extensive page on right-wing violence that has been there. The problem is, you see, you're not supposed to.
Right-wing and white nationalism are different things, Jim. There are right-wingers in countries that don't even have, even a substantial minority of white people.
And there lies the problem. You see, Wikipedia is encyclopedic. It's not a news organization. There's talk about them creating a news stuff.
Come on, Jim. If there is not in an encyclopedia, if there is not a category for white nationalist terrorism, for the violence that is done, like the guy in New Zealand who specifically is saying, I am trying to create an all-white nation, right? A nation of white people. I'm going to, and in his manifesto, he laid it right out. He was going to kill off and scare off all these people of color and all these people who are not Christians. That's not right-wing terrorism, and that's not white nationalism. That's white nationalist terrorism.
Tom, I am familiar with white nationalism, and I am very much against it. And I'm saying is that's covered under white nationalism. The problem is that you could have a category for everything. There will likely be a category for white nationalist terrorism as soon as the media starts calling it that. That's one of the problems, because you're not allowed to sort of just sort of create your own categories. They have to be basically.
Yeah. If you're as soon as the media starts talking about it, Jim, I get that. Oh, Jim, thank you for the call. Medea Benjamin is on the line with us. Medea, welcome back.
Hey. Hey, Tom. Nice to be on with you.
I understand. You have Medea, of course, the co-founder of CodePink.org and numerous other groups, and the author of the most brilliant book on Saudi Arabia. What's the title again?
The Unjust.
Yeah, Kingdom of the Unjust. That book just blew my mind. You are so brilliant and such a great writer. But I understand you're holed up in the Venezuelan embassy. Do I have that right?
Yes, it's crazy, Tom. We were 2 days ago at the military attaché office. It's actually 2 buildings in Washington, D.C., and the opposition came and held a press conference and then proceeded to go inside and take over the buildings. They did the same thing at the New York consulate 2 days ago, and when the Venezuelan diplomat tried to go into the consulate, he was not allowed inside. And this is with police, U.S. police and Secret Service backing the opposition.
The opposition being this right-winger in Venezuela that Trump has recognized, even though saying he's the president of the country, even though he never ran for president. He's merely the Speaker of the House, essentially.
Absolutely, absolutely. Doesn't have 1 vote as president, whereas Maduro has 6 million. So the U.S., the Trump administration is facilitating the theft of these buildings. And the opposition put out that they were going to come to take the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. today. Mm-hmm. So some of us came in last night. We slept here. We called for other people to come as reinforcements. We're doing a rally here. And we're just appalled that the Trump administration can decide who's the president of another country, what property belongs to whom, and violate the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which says even if you don't have diplomatic relations, even if they're cut off, you still have to respect the property of that government. You cannot go inside. You cannot take anything from the building, and you certainly can't give it to somebody else.
Right.
So the U.S. is violating all international norms, and it's just appalling.
Medea, I'm beginning to think, I'm remembering back to 2010 when Barack Obama had, 2 years left to go, and was 22. Yeah, it was 2 years away from re-election. And Donald Trump tweeted out, "Expect Barack Obama to start a war in order to get himself reelected." And, clearly he thinks like this. George W. Bush, rather, in 1999 told his biographer, Mickey Herskowitz, that if he got elected, he was going to have a war, and because that's how you get reelected, essentially, that his daddy made a big mistake by only having a 3-day war. I'm increasingly concluding that Donald Trump is trying to create a war with Venezuela as part of his reelection process or campaign. Do you think that I'm off base on that? Is that too weird?
I don't think it's too weird. I think if things don't look well for Trump as the elections get closer, he would certainly do that. But it also seems like he has been preparing for a war. I just came back from Iran. So both in Venezuela and Iran, the economic sanctions are a kind of warfare, and they are certainly affecting millions of people, making their lives miserable. And the strategy is to have them rise up against the government.
Right.
In Venezuela, they're doing a much better job at that than in Iran. Things are a lot quieter in Iran. But, yes, I think you're right that Trump is preparing for a war.
And this could be World War III if it takes place both in the Middle East and in South America.
Well, and imagine what it would do to the whole of Brazil and Colombia and the entire region. I mean, this is a civil war that's being created. Whether or not the U.S. is intervening in it, he's trying to get the military to start fighting among themselves. And we've seen already decades of war in Latin America with paramilitaries and death squads and all kind of horrible things going on. And this is what's going to start another round of that.
Yeah. So just to recap, you are in the Venezuelan embassy right now, along with a bunch of other Americans, trying to protest or to try to physically prevent the right-wing, quote, opposition from Venezuela from taking over this building?
Yeah, we're trying to protect the embassy and keep it in the hands of the elected government.
Is the American...
If indeed...
Huh? I'm sorry. You don't finish your thought. I'm sorry.
And if indeed they come in with police, we have to leave, at least there is a record that Venezuelans inside tried to protect their embassy, and they were supported by those of us who care about issues like international law. We're there to show our solidarity.
We're talking with Medea Benjamin of CodePink.org. Medea, is the American press covering this?
The American press did cover the fact that the opposition took over 3 buildings 2 days ago, but they didn't put it in terms of the Geneva Conventions, the Vienna Conventions and the violation of international law. They just simply reported on it and said that the Trump administration was happy to help them with this takeover.
Remarkable. And I'm assuming that you have information about this at CodePink.org for people who want to get more on what's going on?
Well, it's on my Facebook, and on the CodePink Facebook would be the easier place to. We did a live stream from inside the embassy. We'll do a live stream at the rally we're having, which is 5:30 East Coast time. And yes, so Facebook of CodePink or Medea Benjamin would be the best way.
Facebook of CodePink or Medea Benjamin. Medea, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Tom. Much love to you.
Thanks for dropping in, and best of luck. I mean, keep safe. This is amazing stuff. Mark in Prairie du Sac, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, we got about a little over a minute before the hard break here. Quick one.
What I found ironic now is apparently there's some of these Christian groups now that have embraced Ayn Rand and are espousing that John Galt is her version of Jesus Christ.
Yikes.
Which is just. I mean, the world is turned upside down. I mean, that's the British.
Yeah, Ayn Rand, who said you can't be a Christian, and that Christianity is fundamentally wrong.
It's just remarkable, and a lot of what you're saying is I've quoted it before, but I mean George Fitzhugh from the South was talking about it, that the Civil War was a protest against the doctrines of natural liberty, human equality, and the social contract, as taught by Locke and the American sages like Adams, Franklin, Tom Paine, and the rest of those Enlightenment thinkers. I mean, it is just the world is indeed turned upside down. If now the Christians have found a way of co-opting Ayn Rand into their thought processes, and probably it's because related to the whole gospel of prosperity is that's rather than Ayn Rand's secular version of it, it's God's way of showing, well, you're rich, so that must be what God intends.
Yeah, and join us because you too can get rich.
Yeah,
I mean, I get it. Mark, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to Sirius XM. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We're going to check in about 4 minutes with Talk Media News and find out what's at the top of the news here, get an update on the most recent things. And we'll continue with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back. Stick around. 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much time. Of course, this topic has been preoccupying me for the last 760 days or however long Trump's been in office.
Yeah.
But the thing is...
You mean as a former military guy or just in general?
No, as a former Intel analyst for
Intel analyst, that's
almost 30 years. Yeah. And also, look, we're in a bad situation, all right? George Bush was manipulated by Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, and the others, the other neocons.
Cheney.
And
although he was happy to go along with it. I mean, he wanted a war.
Remember? Yes, and how did especially Rumsfeld, how did he manipulate George Bush? Well, Rumsfeld's a smart guy. He used a lot of biblical verse. He he appealed to George Bush's desire to have a good, strong economy for the billionaire class, and George Bush is way more intelligent than Donald Trump. I'm sorry, it's just a fact as I see it.
Right, and he's also not the brightest bulb in the tree. That's a pretty low bar.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and right-wing violence, as the pattern shows, went down under George Bush, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Right-wing violence usually goes down under a right-wing president because they're somewhat appeased. They're somewhat happy.
Right.
It has continued to rise, and that's what got my interest. What we're seeing here, it continued to rise under Donald Trump, and what we're seeing here is a classic leaderless resistance model, and that's what I kind of specialize in. And it's not good. I mean, it does not bode well because Donald Trump, there's nothing he can do. And these people call in, I mean, there's nothing he can do to stay those two forces, even if he wanted to. And the thing is I hear these people call in, they say their spouse or their loved ones in the military and they would never do anything wrong. Well, okay, they have a good heart and good intentions, but it's naive. It doesn't take, it only takes a handful. Okay, yeah. The military we have to follow orders. I mentioned one time about a possible computer virus from who knows where. It doesn't really matter. All you have to do is shut down a major metropolitan area. That would be a crisis. And as far as people would not know. They would just feel that they are, the military would just follow orders, and they would feel that they were restoring order and ameliorating chaos. Okay, they would not know what they're doing is that what they would be doing is facilitating a coup. All right, and no matter what, like I said, even if Donald Trump just loses the election, and we get someone in there that these right wingers can use as a straw man. It doesn't really matter. It could be like a person of color. It could be Kamala Harris. It could be Cory Booker. Whatever. What we're going to see is like a yellow vest type movement in America, but it's going to be much more violent than what's in France. What's going on in France is going to be more violent, and war at a certain point is corporate. There was a guy I wanted to call in and ask him. He did a thing about Red Hotel or something about how hotels like in Rwanda, and he mentioned Panama played an important role in saving people's lives. Well, I wanted to ask him, would he do a hotel like in Austria, where spies used to meet?
Yeah,
and
it's all. I'm sorry, Dave, we're out of time. It's all fascinating speculation, and I give us a shout back on Friday if you can. I'd love to extend this conversation. Dave, thanks a lot for the call. And we'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Yeah, 10 minutes before the hour. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in just a moment. Ellen Ratner will be with us. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, new book by Ellen Ratner. Speaking of Ellen Ratner, she is on the line. Ellen, what's going on in the world today?
Well, thank you so much. Well, it's really interesting. Disney closed at 12:02 Eastern Time
to buy Fox Entertainment. Now, Fox itself, the news channel and the sports channel, et cetera, is going to be under Fox, and they have asked former Speaker, House Speaker Paul Ryan, to be among the 4 appointees on the board of directors of their newly established public company.
Now, I wanted to talk to you about this, Ellen, because you worked for Fox for years and years and years.
I did for 21 years.
Yeah, and I think you just recently did not renew your contract. And my understanding is that noon yesterday, a new company that is owned by the Murdoch family also, but is now being run by Lachlan Murdoch, who up to this point had been running things like National Geographic, which has been running some great documentaries on climate change and things. That Lachlan Murdoch, who apparently is not the crazed ideologue, but more interested in making money.
No, he's definitely not. And apparently he wants to move Fox more towards the middle.
Right, so he's taken over Fox News, and meanwhile, Sean Hannity seems to be freaking out that Fox News may end up not supporting Donald Trump any longer. And I would also think if I was Lachlan Murdoch, I'd be, you know, which way is the wind blowing? Oh, it's not blowing in the direction of Donald Trump. Time to back away from this crazy guy and start embracing the old Paul Ryan kind of Republicans.
Listen, money is the bottom line there, for sure.
So do you think that in the next few weeks, next few months, next few years, or are they going to wait until after the election, that we're going to see a noticeable, measurable, significant change, meaningful change in Fox's ideology?
Before the election in 2020, but I don't know how soon before the election in 2020. That's just my guess.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating stuff. Keep us up to date on that, okay?
Okay. Now, also, this is a honest whatever. I'm on the American Advisory Board of Reporters Without Borders. But it's very interesting that apparently there was a State Department presser via telephone, and they only invited media that was faith-based. Now, I happen to know for absolute fact that AID, which is run through the State Department, had a faith-based group that was just NGOs, non-government organizations. So clearly they are pushing faith-based as opposed to the way it used to be under Bush, under Clinton, and under Obama, which was nonpartisan.
Right. And my understanding is that the faith-based reporters that Mike Pompeo allowed into his press conference, none of those religions that were represented by those religious media outlets represented Islam or Hinduism or, you know.
No, it was only Christian.
And presumably Jewish or not?
I don't think Jews were allowed, frankly.
Whoa.
I really don't. I don't know, but my guess is that it was Christian. I know that the State Department, USAID, was Christian.
Wow.
That I do know.
Wow. Okay. What else is up?
Okay. Now, the other thing is the president is going to Lima, Ohio today. This is the Army's only tank plant that is left. And he's going to be talking. It's going to be when you're off the air. But his remarks are going to be on the Pentagon budget and the need for the Pentagon budget. And so that is going to be happening today.
Okay.
He's in, as I said, Ohio, the great state of Ohio, which is, of course, where I'm from. But, however, this is really very interesting. He's going to be talking about why it's so important to have this budget supported by the Pentagon, et cetera.
Yeah, I saw Robert Lighthizer op-ed in the Washington Post in support of the, kind of setting this up. I don't know if you caught that.
Well, then the White House put out something today about it, too, even before the president's remarks.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the president also tweeted out this morning about George Conway. This is Kellyanne's husband, who is, by the way, a Republican. Right. He's definitely not a Democrat. It says George Conway, often referred to as Mr. Kelly Conway by those who know him, is very jealous of his wife's success and angry that I, with her help, didn't give him a job he so desperately wanted. I barely know him, but take a look, a stone-cold loser and husband from hell. That's what he said about him.
Take a look at him, like his face would tell you that? Might that be because George Conway is, I believe, half Filipino?
Right.
Is this a racial comment that Donald Trump is making about Kellyanne Conway's husband?
I have no idea why he does what he does. Believe you me, if I knew what he did and I could be in his brain for just 1 minute, I'd have a lot more to say.
Yeah, I guess, if you survived
it. Okay, now, there is an interesting thing that Senator Johnny Isaacson, who's a Republican from Georgia, said the president's targeting of John McCain drives him crazy. He said the country deserves better. The McCain family deserves better. I don't care if he's president of the United States, owns all the real estate in New York, or he is building the greatest immigration.
I'm guessing Johnny Isakson is not up for re-election next year.
I didn't look at that, but
because it seems like the only Republicans who are willing to challenge Trump are the ones who are not worried about a primary.
Right. Well, my guess is that you're probably right. He was probably elected 2 or 4 years ago or whatever.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. Ellen Ratner with TalkMediaNews.com, right?
Right.
Yeah,
.com.
there you go. .com. Ellen Ratner. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. It's brought to you by GhostForTheOldGoat.com and Ellen's new book, Loving What You Do. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. We'll be right back with Are You Prepared? Oh, Vicki Ward's going to be with us to talk about Javanka. Stick around. This is going to get fascinating.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism has understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering, beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you, and it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff, and you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, whoa, link to the server is down. That's not a good thing. And on the line with us, hopefully, is Vicki Ward.
Yes.
Hey, Vicki, you can hear me?
Hello.
Oh, great. Okay, our phone system just crashed, but you got through in the process. Editor-in-large at Huffington Post, author of the new book, Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption. VickiWard.com, VickyWard.com is the website, and people can tweet you at VickyPJWard. And Vicki, tell us about the book, Kushner, Inc. Is this about Jared's father and him, or is this about Jared and his wife? I'm sorry I haven't had an opportunity to read it or even see it yet.
So it's the extraordinary story of Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And it's really the story of two people who are not what I think we all hoped they'd be, not what they seemed. You know, the real story, you know, Jared and Ivanka, unfortunately, are not the moral center of this administration, which is what a lot of people hoped at the outset. They're not the moderating influence.
Well, this is how the media characterized them. You know, they used to be Democrats. They're reasonable people. They're young. They're attractive. Right. Isn't this sweet? They'll moderate crazy old Donald. It's not the case, huh?
Right, and I think that the book shows that actually these two, you know, and you mentioned Jared's father, Charlie, that these two, because of their backgrounds and because of the culture that they come from, are very entitled and very disdainful of rules, including the rule of law. They really believe that rules are for other people. And, you know, this has created all sorts of problems, actually, just on a small level in the working environment of the White House, because, you know, most people go into government for public service, and they have to divest of all their assets, stocks and shares, of everything they have to avoid conflict of interest. Jared and Ivanka really haven't divested at all. It's as if, you know, that they're in, you know, rules don't matter for them. And, you know, this has all sorts of really serious ramifications. It affects, you know, the way they've conducted themselves in domestic policy and in foreign policy. And I think the book makes the argument that it's really dangerous for this country.
So how did this whole myth of Javanka, of Jared and Ivanka being, you know, these wonderful, helpful people, how did this evolve? Where did this come from? Was this an intentional thing? Was this like, you know, they hired a PR firm to push this out into the media sphere? Or was this just, you know, wishful thinking on the part of, you know, all of us? Or, I mean, what?
No, so it's really interesting. So Jared and Ivanka are very similar people. And both of them sort of consider public relations number one priority. Ivanka once said, you know, perception is much more important than reality. She actually wrote that in one of her books. And, you know, both of them, I say in the book, have been sort of programmed themselves for different reasons to sort of appear as the far more sort of sophisticated, shinier, glossier version of their respective fathers. You know, Jared's entire adult life, his mission has been to avenge what happened to his father, who went to jail in 2005.
At the hands of Chris Christie.
Yes, and to rehabilitate the Kushner family name. Now, I say in the book there was actually a really considered three-point plan that was cooked up by the public relations guru, Harold Rubenstein, that, you know, the Kushners had to sell up out of New Jersey and buy a trophy building in New York. That was part one. Part two was to buy a media outlet so they could control their image. And the third was for Jared to date someone prominent. And, you know,
I remember when this is like a couple of years ago, this story first broke, that you know, the reason Jared married Ivanka was because that was his ticket back into respectability, and the reason he bought, was it the New York Observer, this newspaper?
Yeah. The Observer was sort of put him in the social orbit to meet Ivanka. But the point is that I think that these two are, you know, have been programmed to focus on their image, and they are the ones that have been very busy putting out this sort of myth, this surface idea that they are the adults in the room. And I think the book really shows how they're just not what they seem. Right. That they are very, very transactional.
We're talking with Vicki Ward. Her new book that she just referred to is Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption. VickiWard.com is the website. And of course, the book is available today wherever you get your books. Vicki, is all of this a little more sophisticated or friendly for the New York Times way of saying that basically Jared and Ivanka are grifters?
Yeah, that was you put it. That you got it right.
And if so, that they both learned it from their fathers?
That would also be correct. But I think what's sort of more important is the ramifications for that once you go into government. I mean, look, Jared, when he worked for his father in the family's real estate firm, and my last book was about the world of New York real estate, so I know this subject area very, very well. Mm-hmm. He developed a reputation for being an imperious delegator who didn't really know the details of anything. He was a bit of a bully and very rude to subordinates, but not to anyone important. Now, not knowing the details doesn't really matter when you're running, your father's business that you're going to inherit. But it really matters when you go into the White House and then suddenly you haven't filled out a security clearance form correctly, and suddenly, oh, look, there's a FBI investigation led by James Comey looking at Russian collusion, and oh, look, Jared hasn't mentioned on his form that he met with, a senior Russian diplomat and a Kremlin-connected banker during the transition. And so, Jared, and I say this in the book, is the one who pushes Trump to fire James Comey at exactly the same time that the media suddenly learns of all these very, very serious omissions from on his security clearance form. And Jared, who normally sort of whispers privately in Trump's ear, on this occasion had a stand-up row in front of people and in front of the president with Steve Bannon and made a three-pronged argument to Trump that he must fire James Comey. He said, number one, the FBI doesn't like Comey. Number two, the Democrats don't like Comey. And three, the base will love it if you fire him. There are lots of people who disagree.
This is a purely political argument for firing the head of the FBI.
Right. No, it was perceived as an effort to save himself.
Because Comey was looking into Jared Kushner too. Because
it's a felony not to fill out a security clearance form correctly.
But is Jared so short-sighted that he thought that he's committed a crime, the head of the FBI is looking into this crime, get rid of the head of the FBI and the criminal investigation is going to go away? I mean, if that was his logical thought process, that seems like the thought process of a pre-teenager.
Right, but these two people, Jared and Ivanka, you have to think of them a bit like Inspector Clouseau. Everyone else can see the sort of bumbling incompetence around the White House, but they can't see it themselves.
So you're the little boy who's saying the emperor has no clothes here. I mean, to use that,
yes,
or little girl, as the case may be, I suppose, to use that old.
That is exactly correct. I mean, the next thing he did that I, again, isn't an obvious move for people of normal judgment. He's busy having all these meetings with investors of companies that he hasn't actually divested from. In one case, he hadn't even disclosed that he still had an investment. And he's the one who pushes for the White House logs to be closed. Remember the spring?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an outrage. I mean, at the time,
these are the
public
visitor logs.
explanation. Yeah, the visitor logs.
This is how we find out who's hanging out with the White House, with people in the White House.
The American public is entitled to know what's happening at the White House.
Yes.
They are entitled to know who's going in, and at the time, the official word was that the logs were closed for security reasons. But actually, Trump, he didn't like the backlash in the media, and he turned to Sean Spicer, who was then the press secretary, and said, "Who has closed the logs and why?" And Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, everyone around, they all suspected. Actually, they knew it was Jared who was conducting all this business because his father had a serious financial problem. He had a building, this trophy building in New York, was bleeding financially, and he desperately needed foreign investment. So, of course, Jared didn't want the public knowing what was going on. But what happened was that a year later, John Kelly, a general with a general's mindset, actually opened the White House logs. So then we were able to see that actually, Jared had all these meetings with Lloyd Blankfein, who is an investor in a company he still had a stake in, Apollo and Citigroup, who then subsequently made loans to his family business, and John McCain, when he was sort of reading reports of this.
Vicki, can you stick around for about another 5-10 minutes here? Of
course.
This is an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I want to get into Jared Kushner's relationship with people in the Middle East, particularly Mohammed bin Salman.
Of course.
We are talking with Vicki Ward. She is the author of the new book, Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And Vicki's website is VickiWard.com. You can tweet her at VickiPJWard. Stick around. And welcome back. Vicki, tell me about the relationship between Jared Kushner and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and how that relationship, A, came about, B, why it's important to Jared, and C, how it's distorting American foreign and perhaps even domestic policy.
Yeah. So Jared, I think, looked at he was then the future Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and I think he thought he saw an opportunity, money is what he saw. The
Saudis or their other billionaire buddies in the Middle East might invest in Jared's building that was bleeding money.
Well, and subsidize his peace plan, and his and also his private interest. MBS, on the other hand, I think saw Jared as a pawn.
As a useful idiot.
Who could be useful, and get and a conduit into the White House, and someone to be played. So MBS very sort of cleverly, persuades Jared to persuade Trump to have the the first official U.S. visit is not to, a country with shared democratic values like Britain or France, but to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where they have this summit that's meant to be all about cooperation in the Gulf, right? And days after it's over, MBS makes a complete mockery of the whole thing and of America by announcing a blockade on the neighboring country of Qatar, which is much because he wanted its resources. Qatar is much richer than Saudi Arabia.
I didn't know that.
And Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, and Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, were absolutely horrified. They had no idea of this.
Well,
and
it's because the 5th or 6th Fleet or whatever is based in Qatar, isn't it?
Right. But what's even worse is Rex Tillerson knew that the MBS would never have done this if he hadn't had a green light from Jared Kushner. And what's noticeable is the Qataris had recently turned the Kushners down. The Kushners had gone to them for money for their building. And so you just have to follow the money. I mean, it's really simple. So Jared Kushner, still thinking that MBS is going to pay for all the things he's ambitious on, then, blocks everyone, all the national, everyone in the State Department, National Security Council, who should be sitting in on meetings, are all kept out, while Jared has these private visits back and forth. And the next thing that happens is MBS, right after Jared's been visiting, MBS rounds up his efforts to get money out of Qatar haven't worked. So the next source of money he rounds up all these influential Saudis and imprisons them, if you remember, accusing them of corruption. Rex Tillerson said to Jared Kushner, Jared, have you noticed there are 7 branches of the Saudi royal family. The only branch that MBS has not imprisoned are his own blood relatives. Don't you think it's statistically unlikely that they're not corrupt too? And Jared just didn't want to know.
Wow.
And the next thing he did was...
Vicki, hang on. We just got to take a bump here, and I've got to read on the commercial side. I'm reading a live commercial on the nonprofit side. It'll be a nonprofit pitch, but it's 1 minute, so we'll be back in 1 minute, okay? Thank you very much. We're talking with Vicki Ward, VickiWard.com, and her new book, Kushner, Inc. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you, and it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out. And sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff, and you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. We're talking with Vicki Ward. Her new book, Kushner, Inc., just came out today. Vicki PJ Ward on Twitter, and VickiWard.com is the website. Vicki, we just have a couple of minutes here before the end of this block. Just to wrap this up, we were just talking about how Kushner goes over to Saudi Arabia. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, has determined that he can play this guy. Kushner is desperately hoping he's going to get money both for his own personal efforts and to fund the Middle East peace deal from the Saudis. Immediately after he goes over, MBS arrests a whole bunch of people from 6 of the 7 branches of the Saudi royal family. The one branch that doesn't get busted is his own family. Kushner doesn't want to hear about that. The one piece that I have heard that I'm not hearing and I'm wondering about is it possible that the reason that MBS was able to specifically target individuals within Saudi Arabia for this shakedown and apparently in one case even beating one of these guys to death was because Jared Kushner shared secret U.S. intelligence with the prince?
That is in the book, and that was confirmed to me by several intelligence sources, yes.
So we have a guy, an advisor to the President of the United States in the White House, a grifter, who shared top-secret U.S. intelligence with the leader of another country, who then used that to imprison and kill his own citizens. That seems to me pretty radical. I mean,
it's extraordinarily radical, and the story has another twist because I mean it's shocking.
Okay, we have just 1 minute left. Go for it.
So then we get to spring of 2018, MBS comes to the United States, and the president asks him for $4 billion to help rebuild Syria. And MBS says, actually, I don't have enough money because he spent so much money on this very brutal war in Yemen, and oil prices were down. Jared Kushner, hearing this, starts to feel rather differently. The Qataris then come to town and say, we've got lots of money, but we need the blockade against us lifted. What happens? A company whose second biggest shareholder is the Qatari Investment Authority bails out the Kushner family building on an astonishing deal, a 99-year lease paid up front, which is unheard of. And the U.S. Says it's no longer going to support the blockade on Qatar.
Wow.
Welcome to foreign policy dictated by the Kushners' personal financial needs.
This is astonishing. Vicki Ward, editor-in-large at Huffington Post. Her new book, Kushner, Inc., Greed, Ambition, Corruption, VickiWard.com. You can tweet her at VickiPJ. Vicki, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for dropping by and for writing this book. It's absolutely brilliant. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's 27, coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This sounds like a hell of a book. We'll be back with your, the news of the day and your calls right after this.
We say fight back!
For our book club today, we're reading from a book by Elizabeth Holtzman, one of the former U.S. congresswomen who sat on the committee that considered impeaching Richard Nixon. And this book is titled The Case for Impeaching Trump. Just came out. This is from the first chapter titled Impeachment. When Donald Trump's presidential election victory was announced in the early morning hours of November 9, 2016, like many Americans, I rubbed my eyes in disbelief and dismay. Two questions raced through my mind. What had become of America that a man so unfit, so small-minded, so mean-spirited could be elected? A man whose ethnic and racial bigotry had set the stage for his presidential run when he called Mexicans rapists and made racist birther attacks on President Barack Obama, whose vulgarity and misogyny were laid bare in the Access Hollywood tape when he bragged about forcibly grabbing women by their genitals, whose performance at presidential debates showed him not only flagrantly ill-informed, but manifestly unwilling to get informed? My second question was about how much harm this man would do to America as its 45th president. I have my answer now to the latter, less than 2 years after the election. President Trump has damaged American democracy far more than I would have guessed. He has refused to protect our system of free elections from foreign interference. He has relentlessly attacked the administration of justice, in particular the investigation into a possible conspiracy with Russia regarding the 2016 presidential election, putting himself above the rule of law. He has failed to separate his personal business from the country's, flaunting the Constitution's requirements. And he has violated the constitutional rights of the people in separating children from parents at the southwest border without due process of law. And to cover up these misdeeds, he has systematically lied to and assailed the press. These are great and dangerous offenses that the framers of our Constitution wanted to counteract and thwart. They provided a powerful remedy: impeachment. Many tremble at the word, fearing how President Trump's supporters will react to an impeachment inquiry, worrying that it will only further polarize an already deeply divided nation, or that there will not be enough votes in the Senate to convict him if the House of Representatives votes to impeach. Just calling for an inquiry will be viewed as a Democratic Party attack on the head of another party, a kind of coup d'etat. It's easy to find reasons to be anxious, but I'm not afraid. As a junior congresswoman, the youngest ever elected at that time, I served on the House Judiciary Committee that voted to impeach President Richard Nixon for the high crimes and misdemeanors he committed in connection with the Watergate cover-up and other matters. Through thorough, fair, and above all bipartisan, the committee acted on solid evidence presented in televised hearings that riveted the nation, handing us the blueprint for how impeachment can be successfully pursued today. In our 225 years of constitutional democracy, the Nixon impeachment process has been proven to be the only presidential effort that worked. Though Nixon resigned, the only president ever to do so, 2 weeks after the committee's impeachment vote, he did so to avoid the certainty of being impeached and removed from office. we became a better nation for having held the president accountable. All of which raises two further questions. Should we be considering the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump? Will we again become a better nation by pursuing that option? To answer, we need to set aside President Trump's unremitting attacks on the environment, on our close allies, on the Affordable Care Act, and any disagreements we have over policy, as well as any personal animus, and simply ascertain whether he is engaged in the kind of egregious conduct that would meet the constitutional standards for impeachment and removal from office. This means we have to focus sharply on his potentially impeachable offenses. In doing so, we will find it useful to compare them, when possible, to similar offenses by President Nixon, found to be impeachable by the House Judiciary Committee in 1974. Here's a list of some of President Trump's potentially impeachable offenses developed as of this writing. A possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. On May 9, 2017, Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, who is investigating both his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and Russia's connections to the Trump campaign in connection with influencing the 2016 presidential election. 2 days later, President Trump admitted to NBC's Lester Holt that Comey's firing had to do with that, quote, Russia thing. In other words, President Trump acknowledged that he was trying to shut down the FBI investigation into his own possible conspiracy with Russia. Flynn has since pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. The Comey firing uncannily echoes Nixon's firing of the special Watergate prosecutor for seeking highly damaging information about that president, a brazen defiance of the rule of law that triggered the start of impeachment proceedings against Nixon. A second possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. President Trump has persistently and publicly attacked those heading the Russia investigation, including Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and has repeatedly condemned Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself, suggesting that he wants to fire any and all of them in order to get control of the Russian investigation. He actually did give an order to fire Mueller. A failure to care that the laws are faithfully executed is required by the Constitution. To try to deflect public concern about his possible role, well, it continues from there. The case for impeaching Trump by Elizabeth Holtzman. Welcome back. It's 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jay in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Joe, thanks for listening. Or Jay, excuse me. Thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. It's an honor to be on your show.
Thank you, sir.
What I'm really concerned about is, Trump talking about the bikers and military and police that will have his back and will, only take so much before doing something that'll be very bad. What makes me so nervous is the amount of military personnel. I'm a former Marine myself, and not a lot of people know the mission of a Marine Corps rifle squad is out of the training manual to locate, close with, and destroy all the enemy by fire and maneuver, or repel the enemy's assault by fire and close combat. So every time the president says so-and-so are the enemy of the people, the press is the enemy of the people, the Muslims hate us, like he's essentially saying that's the enemy. All of the oath keepers and 3%ers and the people that are going to defend his administration, that's who you need to that's the mission, is to destroy the enemy.
Right.
That's like nobody's talking about that. I feel
so
like.
Jay, earlier we had
the hell out of me.
Yeah, I raised this question. I mean, Trump says he's got the army, the cops, and the bikers, and Steve King is openly calling for civil war, which is literally where neighbors kill neighbors, brothers kill brothers, or sisters, or whatever it may be. And I asked the question, is this possible, or is this just hyperbolic rhetoric? We had a woman call up, say that her husband flies Hornets in the, I believe, in the Army or the Air Force. He's a bomber pilot, basically, a fighter pilot. And she said, no, the military, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, and the culture of the military is such that You know, the brass will not go along with Trump if he says turn your guns on Americans, and the enlisted men will not go.
But Tom, the thing you have to consider about that is, you know, there are principled people in the military. General Mattis was the one that I had my most faith and trust in. But the thing about it is, you know, under the UCMJ, you follow the orders of the officers appointed over you. And Donald Trump, as the commander-in-chief, he's the highest, military officer. And that's what is the most scary thing is if he commands it, the military does it. There is no like that, and that's the worst part. And here's the other thing, and this is something that I think we're glossing over as well. When other medias or other people, like, we were able to do a lot of the things we did to, Germany and to the Vietnamese and the Japanese because we called them things like Krauts and Japs and, these derogatory subhuman names. We're doing that right now when you have right-wing media calling people libtards and snowflakes. They are dehumanizing the people on the left because it'll be that much easier to kill them when you don't see them as fellow Americans. Well,
this is what they did in Rwanda. They called them cockroaches. They, the Hutus called the Tutsis, or whichever way it was, cockroaches. And that was the phrase and this was a genocide, a civil war that was promoted by talk radio in Rwanda. It was the talk radio host who went on the air that morning and said, go out there and kill your neighbors. And people did.
And we're doing it here, but it's not being talked about. When you hear people say a libtard, which is incredibly offensive because you're essentially saying liberals are mentally deficient by using a combination of liberal and the incredibly derogatory term for a person with special intellectual disabilities. By matching those two together, you are dehumanizing and otherizing that person so that you can kill them without feeling bad about what you're doing.
Wow.
That's what scares me, and we're not talking about that.
Yeah. And I remember the way that the Vietnamese were demonized, and I remember my dad who joined the Army, during World War II, throughout probably most of his life, referring to Germans and Japanese by using those derogatory, because he fought them, I mean, that was the propaganda of that day. And to see, classic wartime propaganda techniques being turned against the political enemies of the president, or not even enemies, just, political people who disagree with the president's policies is damn shocking. Jay, thank you for the call, and thank you for the insight into the military from your experience there.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you. Dave in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Is this Dave who called saying that you didn't like the Green New Deal?
I did. I called yesterday. I appreciate you taking my call again today.
Sure.
The reason I called today was I got to thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I guess this kind of tags along with the last caller, but I think I was wrong, at least in some ways. And when I say that, calling the Green New Deal stupid like I did, the facts, I still can't find anywhere where it says, any research that says that we put out as much carbon emissions as China. I think that we could debate those, our sources or whatever.
No, I think, but what my point was, we put out 25% since the Industrial Revolution. An awful lot of that was more than 30 years ago before China industrialized. So China may be producing less than,
But my point is, not to get off the subject, but my point is that I think what I didn't recognize during our conversation yesterday is that you see it as a moral issue, whereas I see it as a practical issue. And I think that's the disconnect across the aisle a lot of times is, I have kids, and so I think you were saying we need to make this world safe for the future, and I appreciate that at least you're thinking about those things. Even if I don't believe them necessarily, I think I failed to recognize the moral stance that's being taken by Democrats on it. And the reason that I say that is, I often talk, when I said that I was conservative yesterday, the issue that would make me conservative is I'm against abortion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm often told that is.
You know, Dave, I know
When
liberals who are opposed to abortion. A close friend of mine
Right.
was the president of Democrats for Life. I mean, there are anti-abortion liberals.
But the reason I bring that up is people will say, "Oh, that's stupid," and I think that they don't see the moral side of my argument. I would never ask you to. Well, I'm not asking you to agree with my side, but what I would ask the opposition to say is, just imagine I really do believe that that's a child being killed.
Sure.
Then I think that's where we have to meet in the middle on some of these issues. You know,
and respect each other's points of view. I agree with you, Dave. The one part of the Green New Deal that, frankly, I think is the part that's giving Sean Hannity and folks over at Fox News absolute fits, is the proposal that the government be the employer of last resort. In other words, that it's called guaranteed jobs, right? And this is something that we had in the United States from 1933 until somewhere in the late 1950s or early 1960s as part of the original New Deal. And basically what Franklin Roosevelt said was, I don't want to give anybody welfare. We've got, a third of the country unemployed. You've got people literally experiencing starvation, near famine conditions in parts of the United States. Horrible, horrible situations. But I don't want to give people welfare because I believe that demeans them. I would rather give them a job. And so we're going to create federal agencies. And John Maynard Keynes said, the famous economist who was advising Roosevelt, he said, if you hire one man to dig a hole and another man to fill the hole, as long as you're paying both of them, you're putting money into their pockets, and they will use that money in the marketplace to buy things, because these are people at the bottom of the economic ladder. They're going to spend 100% of the money they get, and the process of buying things will generate demand, and demand is what drives an economy. So if you can generate enough demand, entrepreneurs will start building businesses and starting factories and invent things to meet that demand. And that's exactly what happened, by the way. That put America back together. And so he said, okay, anybody who doesn't have a job and can't find a job, we're going to plant 1 million trees. We're going to do the Civilian Conservation Corps. We're going to dam the rivers in Tennessee, and we're going to build make electricity there and in Nevada with the Hoover Dam and the TVA. And we're going to provide jobs. We don't have, Americans in rural areas don't have access to electricity, so we're going to create the Rural Electrification Administration, the REA, and we're going to put people to work, give them government jobs. And by creating these government jobs that rebuilt the infrastructure of America that we're literally to this day still using, not only did he get us out of the Great Depression, not only did he generate that aggregate demand that put the economy back on track, but the legacy of it is this extraordinary infrastructure all across the country that was built by Franklin Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower. And that's the goal of the Green New Deal, is to say, yes, we're going to do that same thing. And if somebody can't find it, if somebody's living in West Virginia and the mines are closed and nobody's investing in that area, and you've got, unemployment of 20, 30% in these areas, then we're going to go into those areas as the government and pay people to solarize houses and in the hopes that they will get a paycheck, which means that they'll start buying things locally in West Virginia, which means that businesses are going to want to move into West Virginia to supply that demand, and then those businesses will start hiring people, and it becomes generative just like it did in the 1950s. Am I making sense, Dave? That seems to be, to me, the biggest part that conservatives are objecting to, is that government is guaranteeing jobs.
Two sides of that. First of all, on guaranteeing a job, that is certainly not the clip that you hear on TV. I'll say that. You hear AOC saying things like, "We're going to provide money even if you don't want to work."
She never said that, to the best of my knowledge.
Well,
what she said is, we're going to offer jobs.
It may be
and the jobs would be, that is the whole Green New Deal, is we're going to offer green jobs.
And I guess from my point of view on the, by the way, I mentioned I'm an engineer. I would love that that would be perfect for my industry. I'm not disputing what you're saying in the plan, but from a ideological standpoint, I do think that if solar were in some of the other ideas that you had, if solar were the better option, I do tend to think that the free market would have already sniffed it out a little bit harder than it has so far.
Well, the thing is, the market has been distorted. We subsidize the fossil fuel industry in the United States right now to the tune of $300 billion a year. And down in Florida, where there's a hell of a lot of sunlight, and keep in mind, Germany is the cloudiest country in Europe. It's cloudier than Michigan in Germany. And Michigan has lake effect. I grew up in Michigan. It's IFR 50% of the year. And Germany was able to pull this off. But down in Florida, Rick Scott got a law passed that makes it almost impossible for you to put solar on your house. You can't, if your house is connected to the electric grid, you can't solarize it.
Yeah, but that doesn't prove the cost benefit of.
No, but it totally distorts the market.
It's being done.
It totally distorts the market. So you can't say that the free market would provide these things because the so-called free market has been distorted by these subsidies and by these laws.
I can certainly I can certainly agree with that point.
Yeah.
We don't live in a pure free market.
Yeah, that's a fact. Dave, good talking with you. I got to run here, but thanks for the call back. And yeah, I think a respectful conversation among people who have different fundamental perspectives is a really healthy thing, and I look forward to future conversations with you, Dave. Thank you very much. It's coming up on, well, it's 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a few minutes. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
You are listening to the #1 progressive radio show in America, defending America from the weapons of mass deception. And welcome back. Gene in Andover, Minnesota. Hey, Gene, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Yeah, hi, Tom. I just wanted to take more of a optimistic view on the prospect of civil war.
Mm-hmm. Go for it.
I don't think that the deep state, and by that I mean the conservative donor class, is going to allow Trump or King or anybody else to advocate something like that for long, because for the main point is it would be really bad for business.
That's an interesting point I hadn't considered. And you're right, the billionaire class does own the Republican Party. Huh. That's actually good news.
Pardon me?
That's good news.
Yeah. I kind of think they look at Trump like the Doberman that relieves himself on the Oriental rugs.
Mm-hmm.
They'll put up with it as long as it still has a function.
Yeah, as long as he can still bark and bite. And then the question is, you know, when he can no longer bark and bite, I mean, if he completely loses credibility with the American public because it comes out that he's been, you know, sucking up to Russia, for example, just because he wants to make hundreds of millions of dollars on a Trump Tower in Moscow, which is what Adam Schiff is now saying. You know, the congressman who's the head of the Intelligence Committee in the House of Representatives. If that sinks in to the Fox News viewers, or if the transition that Fox News went through yesterday under new management, now it's being run by the son of Rupert Murdoch rather than Rupert Murdoch, if that means that Fox News isn't putting up with his BS anymore, then at that point the billionaires pull the plug, and guess what? Mike Pence is the next president.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Fascinating. Gene, thank you. That's a brilliant thought, perspective. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind today?
I think I can help you explain the attacks on John McCain by the president.
Okay, go for it.
He knows he didn't have bone spurs. He knows that.
Right.
He knows John McCain was offered an early out, but refused it.
Right.
So his cowardness, he can't allow into the media. So he has to attack a hero to justify his own take on his life. And he can't deal with that. He can't deal with his supporters thinking that he was a coward, that he was.
Yeah. Corporal Bone Spurs here.
Yeah, and that's the long and the short of it. There's no other reason for attacking that man.
Well, you know, what Trump would say, and what in fact he did say in one of his tweets, was that John McCain was the guy. Trump wanted to kill Obamacare. He's trying to destroy every vestige, every piece of any accomplishment by America's first black president. That's his mission. right? He spent 8 years campaigning against Obama, saying this black guy in the White House isn't even an American and isn't even a Christian. He's a Muslim and he's from Kenya. That was his pitch, which is absolutely denigrating our first black president. And now he's trying to remove every bit of his legacy. And the last bit of that was Obamacare. And John McCain was the decisive vote in preventing the Republicans from destroying Obamacare.
Well, if you go back and look at the 2011 speech by President Obama, where he just totally took him apart in that correspondence dinner.
Oh, yeah. Louise and I were in the room when that happened. we were sitting just a ways away from Donald Trump, and we watched his face, and looking back on it, I think that's the moment at which he decided that he was going to run for president and he was going to take down everything Obama did. Corky, thank you. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. Welcome back. Jeff in Acworth, Georgia. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, how are you, sir?
I am great. Thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir. I was just basically filling in on the gentleman we spoke to earlier about as far as the military. I myself am a former Marine, and then I went into the Army, combat veteran, Iraq, the whole 9 yards, left with a Purple Heart. When we do our oath of enlistment, it is an oath to the Constitution of the United States, not the President. So you have what's called lawful and unlawful orders. If a mission ever would to come out or an order to come out to do anything that would be against the Constitution of the United States, that would be an unlawful order, and the military would not do that. So, I've been listening, for the past, and I just want to let you guys know that there's, as far as Trump saying, I've got the bikers, I got the police, and all that, it's just rhetoric.
So if Trump loses and doesn't want to leave the White House, and the bikers come out and start provoking riots with, let's say, in inner cities and in neighborhoods that are heavily people of color, and that devolves into riots essentially. People fighting back, trying to defend themselves, and then Trump goes to the military and says we need to restore peace. You don't think that the military would say okay, even though posse comitatus?
Well, the military would, but I assure you, I was a member in an outlaw motorcycle club, and I assure you that's not going to happen with bikers. We got better things to do.
Okay.
And trust me, much less want to work with the police.
Yeah. Jeff, I hope you are right. I really hope you're right. And, it's reassuring. Jeff, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your experience with us. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for time.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Maureen in Canada. Hey, Maureen, what's on your mind today?
Hey there.
Where in Canada are you?
Thanks. Just near Ottawa.
Okay.
Our lovely capital city.
Beautiful country. Yeah. Beautiful place. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the call, and I really appreciate your show. And for everybody out there, donate because this is important stuff.
Thank you.
And so there's so many things I want to say.
Well, we have 1 minute, Maureen, before the end of the show.
Yeah.
So.
I've been watching this Trump fiasco down there, and it scares the hell out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Hedges says war is the thing that gives us meaning, and he talks about the Civil War in Sarajevo and how, people turned against each other, and it can happen very quickly. And he's scary, and people need to not vote for him in 2020.
Yeah.
The other thing is socialism. Please don't think of socialism as something that is bad. It's I got a lot of help from the government when I was young for education, and I've been paying taxes ever since. My mother was very, very ill, and
so how does the word socialism? Pardon my interrupting, but we just have 20 seconds. How does the word socialism play in Canada, Maureen?
It doesn't.
In other words, nobody's objecting to it? It's okay to say that I'm a socialist in Canada?
I mean, people, there's always sides of the coin that keep things balanced, right? Let's not spend too much money on this. We certainly value.
So this debate is not happening in Canada?
No.
Yeah, fascinating. Maureen, thanks for sharing that with us. And thank you for calling. I look forward to future conversations. Fascinating stuff. An amazing day. We'll be back with more tomorrow. And keep an eye on Fox News now that Rupert's no longer running it, and then they hired Donna Brazile, and now Donald Trump is starting to go, I'm not so happy with Fox News. I think things are getting real interesting all over the whole political spectrum. And now this book about the Kushners, Kushner Inc. Whew. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!